right. Well, why don't you guys turn and greet someone new that you haven't met tonight, and then have a seat.
For most of my life, I was not somebody who believed in God's existence. As a matter of fact, I was somebody who would argue with you if you told me that God exists. If you told me you were a Christian, for sure, that was going to start a debate. And a lot of the people I worked with, officers, suspects, would tell me that they were Christian believers. And I either would test them or mock them, depending on what kind of a mood I was in that day. But I remember when I first encountered the scripture, when I actually bought a Bible for myself and read through the Gospels. And I didn't do it because I was trying to prove them wrong or prove them right. I was just provoked by a pastor who said that Jesus was the smartest man who ever lived. And I thought, well, okay, let's steal some wisdom from Jesus. And so I bought a New Testament and I began to investigate it. That's what ultimately led me to trust that what is being said in the New Testament is reliable. I mean, I had a skill set as a detective reading supplemental reports on old unsolved cases that helped me to read the Gospels like an old unsolved case. It turns out that is really part of the art of sharing what we believe as Christians, is to be able to figure out a way to answer people's objections, to answer their questions quickly, and hopefully with some kind of rhetorical power.
So I'm going to introduce Mark in just a moment. He'll be right out here after a trailer in the movie, but I wanted to set it up. Every now and then in life, the Lord brings someone into your life that you're not sure, why at first. We go way back to where, Lori and I were just married, and I've been married. I'll be pushing 38 years, so that's same girl, but we were over on Valley View. We had a warehouse, a very young church. Not that you guys aren't young anymore, but we were younger. And this guy, Mark Joseph, would come around. He was a missionary raised in Japan. And he was watching this warehouse. All these kids were getting saved. God was doing a work through the youth. And he'd go, you got to get to Japan, Lance. Somehow this thing needs to happen in Japan. I remember just laughing that off. I was in the surf industry, and I just remember Japan being the place they ripped off all of our logos. They didn't follow trademark rules and the whole surf industry. I'm like, I'm never going to Japan. Well, I would go to Japan, and I would go with Mark, this guy that was bilingual and knew his way around. And we would go to some churches. We'd visit, and I began to hear the statistics of a country that was about half the size of our population living in the same geographical footprint of about the size of California. And that if you took the bullet train across Japan, you'd never find a Christian. That 99.92% of the people were Shinto or Buddhist. And I was like, man. And I remember coming back on that Sunday, and I had a burden, and I don't know if it was jet lag or what. I don't usually cry in the pulpit, but that Sunday I cried. I'm like, man, we got to go to Japan. And we had back then a lot of younger bands, punk bands and stuff were part of our church. And the next thing I know is we were taking bands over to Japan and just going for it. It'd be like us right now. All of a sudden, a couple of us are like, God gives us a burden for someplace. And in 3 months, he's just opened a door, and we're standing on stages like this with punk bands. And I'm playing the harmonica with a punk band. And being introduced as this surfboard shaper, harmonica player, and I'd give the gospel. I'd always share about the Creator God, and in rooms of Japanese would get saved. And that would begin a lifelong friendship with a guy who had a heart to go into Hollywood and let God use him as salt and light in the music industry and the film industry. And little did I know what God would do with Mark, but I've been amazed to see this friendship, this just two brothers stepping out in faith. And that's the one thing I wanted to like instill in you guys, that wherever you are right now is like the beginning. That this could be your start of what God would be doing in such a like above and beyond what we could ever ask or think way. And so when he called me up and he was talking about this movie, he wanted myself and a couple of the pastors to come and just review part of it. I literally sat in his studio and I wept. And the movie's a great movie. I wasn't weeping because it was such a great movie, but I really did weep over just being proud of a friend and his obedience to God and watching God use him to the extent that he is. So we were reconnecting recently and had a long lunch. You ever go to a lunch that's supposed to be an hour and 5 hours later, you're like, I think we should order dinner now? It was one of those. And I just said, Mark, you just need to come and share your heart. God's used this Reagan movie. God's used you. Just come and share with us. So we're going to show a trailer. Then when he comes out, I'd like to have a good old Calvary Chapel, La Habra, or wherever you're from, welcome for Mark after the trailer. All right? God bless you.
Welcome to your life.
There's nothing a retired governor can do, but a president.
Now he can do a thing or two.
Everybody wants to rule the world.
I will be frank with you that as a citizen, I would not like to see any political party outlawed on the basis of its ideology, because I still believe, Mr. Chairman, that democracy can handle it.
I was a brand new KGB officer, given my first intelligence assignment. A certain actor and union leader.
Dutch, there's a purpose for your life.
You can run from a bully for so long, but after a while, you're gonna have to stand up to him.
It's my boy!
There's about to be another war right here in Hollywood. The commies on one side, the mob on the other. And you're right in the middle, son.
If you put as much work into your career as you do making your speeches, you'd have an Oscar by now.
Hello, I'm Nancy Davis.
Hello, Nancy Davis. I'm Ron Reagan.
I'm curious, Ron.
What would you say is the issue of our time?
No question about it. Communism and the Soviet Union.
Get in the game. Run for office.
It's you!
I'm running for governor, and I would like your vote.
I forgot your name. Do his initials help, or R? Honey, Roy Rogers is here! And he's running for governor!
Ronnie, remember when we met? You told me that you wanted to make a difference in this world. You know what you have to do.
Governor Reagan again, typically, is against such a proposal.
There you go again.
But he was not afraid to take us on.
There's nothing a retired governor can do about the Soviets, but a president.
Now he can do a thing or two.
Welcome to your life.
I was a lifeguard on a river,
There's no turning back.
and I learned how to read the currents. Not just the ones on the surface, but also the ones deep underneath the water.
I am about to start the biggest war of this century, and I'm not gonna fire a single shot. You're gonna blow up 8 years of diplomacy.
Well, if you think that got their undies in a wad, you just wait.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
What would you have me do?
I want you to fight!
Everybody wants to.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Wants to rule the world.
Man, I got to work on that scowl. That is a mean face. I don't know what happened with that picture. Well, it's so good to be here with you all. And Lance took the first 5 minutes of my talk. I was going to tell Pastor Lance Cook stories from 1993, but oh well. But we did meet way back then. But first of all, my nephew-in-law, Stephen, is here. And I asked Stephen, how many will show up at this dinner? Because he attends. And he said, well, don't take it personally, but you know, for somebody famous like Josh McDowell, it'd be a big crowd. For you, yeah, somewhere in the middle. So thank you all for coming tonight, in spite of that. It's so great to see so many of my friends here and that I've known over the years. And as Lance was saying, we met years ago, and I started attending. It was called Calvary Committed Fellowship Santa Fe Springs back then. And here was Lance, you know, shaping surfboards, and I said, let's go to Japan. And so we went to Japan, and you know, Calvary's had kind of stalled in Japan, and thanks to Pastor Lance, it really got going again, and there's I don't know how many Calvaries there are now, Lance, but probably dozens by now. A lot of it because of your pastor that just got them energized again. And so that was a lot of fun. Well, my son and I, Jordan, who is here, wave Jordan, we're out and about doing different speaking engagements. We're going to go to Chicago in a day or so, but we're here, and part of it is I have a book out that they're in the back. It's called Making Reagan. I joke that if you have somebody in your life, a young person who wants to be a filmmaker, give them this book and you can talk them out of it, because they will never, ever want to make movies if they see how difficult and what a pain it was and why it takes 19 years to make a movie like that. So yeah, give it to them if you want to talk them out of it. But thanks to people like you, I'd love to know how many of you all saw the movie when it came out or since then, or great, that's awesome. Well, thanks to you all, it was, we were #1 for one day. It's better than no days, right? So we beat Deadpool and Wolverine for just one day. So I'll take it. And then on iTunes later, we were also at the top, #1. So yeah, thanks to you all. Since this is, affiliated with Calvary Chapels, I just want to share my Chuck Smith stories that I've been saving all this time. Some of you who are older, I think you remember Pastor Chuck. And, early on, I had some conversation with Pastor Chuck, and I just said, you were so instrumental in the music scene back in the 70s, and you could really have an impact in the film world as well. And he said, well, what could I do? I said, well, it might be good if you could let your congregation, all your churches know when a good movie is coming and a bad movie is coming. Not that you want to get your movie-going advice from your pastor, but it might be good to just let them know. You might want to avoid American Pie 6, just as a thought. And you might want to go see a Narnia movie or whatever. So he said, I'll do it. And so whenever I had a movie that I told him was worthwhile, he would send an email to all the Calvaries across the country and say, hey, this is one we should get behind. And so I really appreciated that. But I'll tell you one funny story on Pastor Chuck, if any of you knew him. If you heard him on the radio, he was a very serious, thoughtful person. And he wasn't like he was jokey, but just a very serious person. And so I worked on The Passion of the Christ with Mel Gibson. I produced the soundtrack, and so I brought Pastor Chuck in to watch the movie. And let me just say, Mel Gibson didn't know anybody from anybody in the Christian pastor world. You could bring in maybe Billy Graham, maybe he might know, but nobody else. He didn't know anybody else. So brought Pastor Chuck in, and he watched the movie. And afterwards, Mel came out, and if you know Mel, he's kind of got, his ADHD has ADHD. So he's kind of always doing this and doing all the stuff. And so he says, Pastor Chuck, what did you think of my movie? And Pastor Chuck, being the serious man that he is, he says, well, I will recommend it. However, it was a very, very violent film. And Mel leans over and goes, yes, it was a real excrement sandwich, wasn't it? And I just oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And Pastor Chuck kind of lurches back, and so after he leaves, I said to Mel, do you have any idea who that man was that you just said that horrible word to? He's like, yeah, it's some guy. I'm like, that is not some guy. That's like the Pope of the evangelical world, and you just said excrement sandwich to him. Are you crazy? And we had a lot of conversations like that, but Pastor Chuck really was excited about the movie. And, for this movie, it took so long that he died on me, so he couldn't see it, but he did read the script, and he had such nice things to say about the script, so hopefully he got to watch his version in heaven. Well, I'm sure most of you are probably not in our business, in movies and books, so whatever I have to say, I want to make sure that it relates to your life, and I think we all have similar circumstances that we all go through. And so I want to think tonight about two words, destiny and endurance. If you're taking notes, destiny and endurance. And I hope I can share some thoughts on that and how it relates to all of us. Well, I am probably the most unlikely producer in the history of Hollywood movies, just saying. And if you need some evidence for it, a few stories on my upbringing. This was not my plan. I just wanted to be a professional baseball player. And I wanted to play in Japan, because I grew up in Japan. I wanted to play in the Japanese major leagues. But that wasn't the way it worked out. So this is plan B. Plan A would have been that. This is plan B. But I had shoulder and elbow surgery and injuries, and so I couldn't play. But I did pitch 2 perfect innings, so I want that on the record. But in terms of myself and movies and entertainment, I was just sharing with Pastor Lance. He had a similar upbringing. So we all grew up in pretty strict households. but I think mine might have been a little more strict than Pastor Lance's. One day, and by the way, this is not telling a story of my parents because they're in on the joke now and we laugh about it. But one day when I was 12 years old, I came home from school and I opened the door to my room and my mother was crying, holding an album of mine. And she said, "We didn't raise you to listen to this kind of music." Now, you're wondering what that album was, right? Maybe a satanic band, maybe Led Zeppelin, something along those lines. She was holding Barry Manilow's greatest hits. And so you never want to make your mother cry. This is like the lowest form of human existence, right? Nobody wants to make their mother cry. So I thought for a split second, should I try to explain to her who Barry Manilow is? Or just, and I said, you know what, it's not worth it. It's like, I'm sorry, I'll throw it away. No more Barry Manilow in this household. And so that was, yeah, that's the kind of household that I grew up in, right? It wasn't exactly arts friendly. My brothers tried to convince my parents that ABBA was a Christian band. Because ABBA, Father, sounds kind of religious, you know, but I don't know if they bought that. I tried to convince my father to let me watch Raiders of the Lost Ark because it was a Bible story, and he didn't buy that at all. So we weren't really a movie-going household per se. So again, like God has a great sense of humor. Sort of like when the prophet is trying to pick, you know, the king and David's father is like, well, I got these kids, and no, I want this one. No, not that one. He's the shepherd. I'm not the one that you would have chosen to get into movies. I thought of this recently because I don't know if you all, I'm trying to think of what your ages are here, but some of you know who the band KISS is back in the day. And again, as kids, we were taught that KISS stood for Kings in Satan's Service, right? That was what we were told when we were kids, like a satanic band. So about a couple of years ago for the movie, I asked Gene Simmons of KISS to come in and give us a song for the movie. So I'm sitting in my studio with Gene Simmons thinking, man, this is the craziest combination in history. I was taught that he was Satanist, and now we're making a song together. Okay, God, you have a great sense of humor. But Gene is a great guy. He's no Satanist, and we've had great conversations about God and faith, but he gave us an amazing song for the movie called Stormy Weather. Well, all that to say, I spent a lot of years kind of in various parts of the entertainment business, in television and film, and really wasn't my plan to get involved in movies, but in 2000, I joined a company that was making the Chronicles of Narnia movies. If you saw, I think probably you guys have seen Holes, right? You younger guys have seen Holes, because that was in a lot of schools that kids had to watch it growing up. But Chronicles of Narnia and Holes and The Passion, and just a lot of great movies like that I got to be a part of. And so that was kind of my journey, but I really wasn't planning to make a Reagan movie per se, but I had a chance to meet him back in '97. A friend of mine had gone in to meet President Reagan and got her picture taken with him, and I said, well, how did you do that? She's like, well, they like people to come in and meet with him, and so if you write a letter, you can get a chance to meet him. So I wrote a letter to the president's staff, and I told them that when I was 12 years old, I had broken the law by voting on my dad's ballot in the absentee ballot, pushing out Reagan. And I get a letter back, and they said, you know, when can you come in to meet the president? I said, well, let me just check my schedule, see when I have time to meet President Reagan. But I got a chance to go in and meet with him, not knowing that I'd make a movie about him one day. But it was really helpful just to get a sense of the man, and it's the Die Hard building in LA, if you've seen the movie. He was on the 24th floor of the Die Hard building. And so, you know, I had a couple of minutes with him, and I could tell he had Alzheimer's already at that point. So he's kind of out of it. And we took a picture together, and it's somewhere. Actually, it's in the back of the book. Took a picture together, but I really didn't connect with him, and so I thought, I gotta try something. So as I was walking out the door, I turned around and I said, Mr. President, we all love you very much, and he winked at me. So I knew that something had triggered something in his memory banks that he did that. You know, his son Michael passed away about 2 weeks ago, and Michael was a huge help to us on the movie, gave us a lot of notes. But Michael had a thing with his dad where his dad was not really a hugger. You know, that people of that generation, the World War II crowd, they weren't like males, were not big into hugging. And so his dad wasn't really much of a hugger. And Michael, as an adult, he said, my dad doesn't hug, whatever. His wife said, why don't you start hugging him and just see what happens? And he said the first time Reagan was kind of, but then he got into the hugging thing. But when he got the Alzheimer's, one day Reagan had been visiting his dad, Michael had been visiting his dad, and he was walking down the driveway, and his wife said, "Turn around." And he did, and Reagan was there going like this because he had forgotten to hug his dad. And in his Alzheimer's state, he remembered, this is the guy who hugs me. And so that was a great story that Michael shared with us as well. Well, I begin this book with a story of me driving with my wife. I want to kind of set the stage for you that I'm not a speed demon out there in the Midwest. I'm driving with my wife and 3 young daughters under the age of like 6. And we're driving through Illinois, minding our own business, heading to a cousin's wedding. And all of a sudden, I'm pulled over for speeding. And the officer, you know, I think it was his first day on the job. He was kind of shaking a little bit. He was like 20 years old, 22 years old. And he said, "You are so far over the speed limit that you have to appear in court." And I'm like, "You've got to be kidding me. There's a car in front of me, a car behind me. It said 65, then 45. How can that be?" And he says, "I don't know, but you're so far over that you've got to come back in a month to this town in Illinois." And I'm trying to process. I'm in a minivan, you know. I'm not driving a Ferrari or anything. So I said, "Okay." He said, "Well, maybe you can do it tomorrow if you call in and get permission." So I called in and I said, like, "Please let me get in tomorrow. I can't fly back to Illinois, you know, for a ticket." Well, I looked at the ticket that he had written me, and it says, "You must appear in court in Dixon, Illinois." Anybody know where Dixon, Illinois, what the significance is? Okay, one person. It's Ronald Reagan's hometown. I'm pulled over for speeding in Ronald Reagan's hometown. I had no idea I was in his hometown. And I've got to spend the night with nothing to do in Dixon, Illinois. Nothing against Dixon if you're from Dixon, but there's not a lot going on in Dixon. I saw like a gas station, a Pizza Hut, and a Holiday Inn, I think it was. So I'm there against my will for a day. And, but it was really, I think it was the first kind of inkling that you're supposed to make a movie about Ronald Reagan, because just in that ordinary place, you know, it's kind of like La Mirada or La Habra. It's just an ordinary place that you wouldn't think like a great president would come out of this place. It's just really ordinary, but that's kind of where America's heroes come from. We come from ordinary places, and many of you in this room as well. So anyway, that's how the whole thing started, was having to spend a day and look around and see his house that he grew up in, the place where he was a lifeguard. But back to my criminal history. So I go before the judge the next day, and just because of my personality, I told my wife, "I want you to record now. I'm going to go the speed limit, and let's just see what happens." So I go the speed limit, and people are flipping me off and cursing me and saying, "What the hell? What's wrong with you? Speed it up." So I go, "Okay, I've got this. For tomorrow, I'm going to show the judge my video of when I go the speed limit." I go before the judge the next day, and I've got my 3 daughters in the front row, you know, in their pretty little dresses, looking up at Dad. Is Dad going to get arrested or not? So I said, "Your Honor, can I please show you the video of what happens when I go the speed limit?" And he just looks at me and he says, "Son, I'm not going to watch your video. Guilty or not guilty?" Well, I've been warned ahead of time by this lawyer. He says, if you say not guilty, there will be a trial. He can actually put you in jail until the trial. So now I'm thinking this is like a horrendous Seinfeld episode gone wrong, that I'm going to be in jail with my 3 daughters at a trial. So I did the sensible thing, and I said, "Your Honor, I'm guilty," and I paid my $500 fine, which is just unbelievable. But I have to thank that whole process, the judge, the lawyer, everybody, because that's what gave me this movie. So everything works out, you know, for good. But it was, at the time, it was a little scary. I came back to California, and then I bought the movie rights to a book on Reagan. And so kind of that's where the whole journey started. The book that I optioned, and again, the relevance for us tonight, you know, it's really important to remember you're a dad, you're an uncle, you're a brother, you're a pastor. You may have a Ronald Reagan in your congregation, right? We all have congregations. It may not be a formal church. It may be where your circle of influence is. But in Reagan's case, his mother was the leader of that congregation. His father was an alcoholic, and mother had married, you know, kind of out of her faith. This was a Catholic, a guy who was not very devout in his faith, and she had grown up Protestant. But she had a moment of crisis in 1919. There was the influenza that killed lots and lots of people across America, and she was one of the people that got it really bad. And she was very near death, and she promised God, if you'll save my life, I will really serve you with all my heart. And she was influenced by a lot of radio preachers as well. And so after she had that experience, her son, Ronald, was 8 years old, and she really poured into him and helped him to get to faith. When Reagan is 11 and a half years old, he finds his dad drunk in the snow. If you remember from the movie, we have that scene where he drags his dad. He finds him drunk, and he drags him into the house. And that really happened. And his mother thought, I've got to do something for this son of mine, or he's going to end up just like Dad, a drunk, basically, the town drunk. So she gives him a book called That Printer of Udell's. And it's just a normal Christian fiction book that was not a Pulitzer Prize winner or anything. But it was the story, amazingly enough, it's the story of a young alcoholic son who finds God and grows up to become a congressman. He becomes a youth leader and then a congressman. It's almost Reagan's life presaged before him of what his life is going to be, except for the congressman part, he's a president instead of a congressman. But he read that book, and then he went to his mother, and he said, I want to declare my faith and be baptized. And the only problem is in this church, the Disciples of Christ, you don't get baptized till you're 12, and he was 11 and a half. So the pastor said, you have to wait 6 months, and he said, I can't wait 6 months, I have to be baptized now. And I always wondered what that was about. Like, what's the big deal? Why can't you wait 6 months? But I think in his mind, he was thinking, I can't go 6 months being unsaved because baptism is so crucial to his faith. So he gets permission to be baptized at 11 and a half, and we have that scene in the film as well, if you remember. But that's really the nuts and bolts, the story of how he grows up to do what he did. The writer who wrote the book that I based it on, he actually went to Reagan's church and said, is there any way I could see the sermons that young Ronald Reagan heard as a child? And the current pastor said, they're in the basement in a box, and nobody has ever asked to see them before. Sure, and he got them. And he found a lot of anti-communist sermons from Reagan's preacher. So everything's like, ding, 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 it's making sense now. The preacher is putting these ideas into 12-year-old Ronald Reagan about the evils of communism and how communism is against God, and he grows up to work against communism. So again, you kind of see the role that a mother has and that a pastor has in somebody's life. Well, so I had to come back to California and hire a writer. So the way that movies work is you hire a writer, and he kind of does, you kind of give him some guidance, and then he writes the movie, the script, and then you get an actor and all that process you go through. So the first thing is to hire a writer. So I just hired a second writer to write the piece and the movie. I think it was probably heavy on my mind because I dreamed, for those of you who saw the movie, I dreamed the first 10 minutes of the movie in this dream. But I don't remember my dreams. I'm sorry. My name is Joseph, but I'm the one that doesn't remember my dreams, unlike the Joseph in the Bible. But I knew if I don't wake myself up, I will never remember this dream in the morning. So I had a presence of mind to wake myself up and write it all down. And I sent it to my writer, thinking he's going to hate me, saying, get out of my lane, let me do my job. But he said, great, and he ran with the whole idea. So the whole KGB agent, all that stuff was, I wish I could take credit for it, but I just take credit for waking myself up. But that became the kind of the origins of the movie. So now I've got to find the actor to play Ronald Reagan. I talked to Jim Caviezel and, believe it or not, Nicolas Cage and all kinds of people. And Nicolas Cage would have taken a lot of hair and makeup to make him look like Ronald Reagan, but it's Hollywood, right? But we talked to different people, but Dennis Quaid was always my first choice. And so Dennis and I went out to dinner at a restaurant in Malibu, and I bought him this Reagan cowboy hat replica. And I gave it to him and gave him the pitch of why I thought he should do it. He told me later, and he said in the press, that when the offer first came to him, he was so scared that he said a tingle of fear went up his spine. But he said, I learned in life that whenever that happens, that means I'm supposed to do it, because you have to overcome and conquer your fears. And so anyway, he hadn't said yes at that point, but I gave him this cowboy hat, gave him the pitch. He says, well, I'll call you in a couple weeks. So he calls me about 2 weeks later, and he says, I tried that cowboy hat on, but it just doesn't fit. It's too big. I thought, he's going to say no. He pauses, and he says, but I think I can grow into it. And so that's how we started our journey together. But it was a long journey, even for the two of us. It was about 6 years between that moment and by the time we finished shooting the movie. And it was just, we planned to shoot, and then COVID hit just as we were about to begin shooting. So my colleague came to me one day, John, and he said, I need a decision from you. Are we going to shoot this movie or not? Are we going to wait till COVID is over? And like you all remember, I've never been through a pandemic before. I don't know, is this ever going to end? I don't know. And I have friends dying on me. thought, man, how pathetic if I died before we make this movie after all these years. So I said, let's just go. We don't know what that means. It's kind of like driving in a snowstorm and you can just see like 1 foot in front of you. But we just decided to start. So we began shooting in Oklahoma. And literally in the middle of a pandemic. We had to shut down twice. So the rules are that if one person on your set gets COVID, the entire set shuts down for 10 days. So for 10 days, 20 days, we had to shut down basically. And it was just, it was a crazy, crazy time, but we somehow, got through it all. People ask me often, like, what is the movie about? What's the theme of it? And I think it's about, back to my earlier thing about destiny and purpose. And, every one of us in this room, whether whatever your job is, I think the message of the film is that each of us has a purpose, something that we're supposed to do in life. And in Reagan's case, he didn't reach it until 69 years old. And he had a lot of, I wouldn't say he had a lot of failure, but he had a lot of like almost successes in his life. He was also divorced. His wife had divorced him and left with 2 kids. And he was kind of washed up at 50. If you remember the scene with his mother on the park bench where he's like, man, I thought, you said I was going to be somebody great, and I'm already, I'm kind of washed up, and I'm 50, and I'm divorced. And so each of us we have those moments in our lives. But I think the idea of that destiny and the purpose is that each of us is put on the earth to do something. And it may be something the world considers important, or maybe something the world doesn't consider important. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change the fact that that's your destiny, whatever it is that you're supposed to do. And so I think that comes through in the film. And if you remember his lowest moment in the movie in Las Vegas, he's really down and out. He has to do some corny skit in the middle of Vegas, and that's kind of the lowest moment he had. And so I hope that you'll take that into your life as well, that there's, what is it? What is it that you were put on the planet to do? And also, we have to do our part too, right? We can't just sit home and play video games and ask God, hey, please help me achieve my purpose. But you have to meet God halfway. He has something that he wants you to do. And you have to also make the effort to get there as well. Well, also, I think people have also mentioned about the movie, we're in these crazy times. I'm sure that in your workplace or school or wherever you are, you probably have a lot of people that disagree with you. And it's getting harder and harder to function in a culture where you disagree, and can you still get along with people? And I think that's one of the lessons of the film, too, is that Reagan was pretty good about being agreeable with disagreeable people he disagree with, I should say. There's a scene with Tip O'Neill, for instance, where they're arguing about something, and often Tip O'Neill would say, in the middle of their arguments, Reagan would say, is it 6 p.m.? Is it 6 p.m. yet? And O'Neill would say, what does it matter? Why are you asking if it's 6 p.m. yet? And Reagan would say, well, if it's 6 o'clock, we're friends again. We argue until 6 o'clock, and then we're friends every day, and that's the way it works. And that was kind of a shocker to Tip O'Neill as well, because he loved to fight. And even on our set in the movie, I had actors of all stripes. I have Republicans and Democrats and Christians and non-Christians and whatever, but everybody functioned, we got along. If you all know who John Voight is, John Voight is like the biggest conservative in the entire universe, right? I'd be like, hey, where did John go? And they would say, oh, he's out recording a video for Trump down the street. And he's making a video saying how Trump is great as Moses and Abraham and whatever. He's just always making these funny videos, these great videos. But another actor, Mark Moses, he'd be off flying out to Montana to campaign for a Democrat. Well, we all still got along. We're professionals. And I hope that in your life, in your workplace, and wherever you are as well, that you can model that as well and remember that yeah, you can still have strong beliefs, but still really get along well with people. And that's what we tried to live out as well in our film. When I mentioned Michael Reagan the other day, so this is, if you remember the film, remember Reagan's wife, his first wife, Jane Wyman. Let's just say she's not the nicest person that ever walked the universe. She's pretty tough, and she breaks up with Reagan because she doesn't like the fact that he's into politics, and she's not into it at all. So I had to be honest in the movie and portray her, as she was. One person told me he was working at a store, and she came in, and she was incredibly rude to him. And so anyway, I've got to do it. But it comes time for the film premiere, and we're at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood. And of course, Mike Reagan is there. He's like, 80 years old, and I'm just dreading this. I'm thinking, oh my goodness. I mean, nobody wants to see their mother look like this in a film, and she comes across as I won't say the word, but you know what I'm trying to say. And so there's Mike Reagan, and I'm just, my heart is in my throat, you know, and so we watched the movie, and afterwards I'm just waiting for him to say, how dare you treat my mom like that, you know. Well, he texts me and he says, yeah, you pretty much nailed her. That's exactly the way she was. I'm like, phew, oh, that's so great. And I said, he says, yeah, you know, she was a tough old bird. And he said, one day I called her up after President Reagan had given a speech. Remember, they'd been divorced for 40 years or so. And he said, he was so excited. He said, Mom, did you see that speech that Dad gave last night? And he said, my mother said, honey, I didn't like those speeches 40 years ago, and I don't like them now. And so that's just the way. But she voted for her ex-husband twice, even though she didn't like his speeches. So, yeah, all of that is, you know, part of our process of making a movie and meeting so many interesting people that knew him. I probably met about 50 or 55 of the people he worked with, and you get their stories, and you kind of put them all in there. But, you know, for Reagan, obviously, you know, we're in a church tonight here, and for Reagan, he was really unashamed of his beliefs. And as he got older, he was even more vocal about them. And he would often quote, if you remember in the movie 2 Chronicles 7:14, he would quote that verse quite a bit, and the verse that his mother taught him. And he and his mother would speak at churches around in their area, and they would do poetry readings, they would recite scripture, and it really was the foundation of his beliefs. And so to bring all that into a movie is really challenging. And for those of you, some of you who've watched faith-based movies, it's like our movie, we wanted to not be too overbearing, and so I think that there are moments that you'll see things like that, but we wanted to make sure that it wasn't like, if you didn't share that faith, that you'd run out of the theater or something like that. But there was a really interesting moment that we covered in the film, if you remember. It was when Reagan received a prophecy that he would be president one day, back in 1970, but it was a conditional prophecy, and it was something to the effect that if you would continue to walk uprightly, one day you'll live at the White House, basically. And that was a really interesting thing that happened. That was 1970. Well, then in 76, he loses when he runs for president, and pretty much everyone thought he was out at that point. In those days, you couldn't be too old, and that was pretty old, so he thought he kind of missed the mark. And I talked to the guy who was with him the moment he lost, and I said, what did he say to you? He said, well, he turned to me and said, I guess it wasn't God's will. So interesting, 1970, he's told that if he does right, he walks uprightly, he'll be president. He loses in 76, and he thinks, gee, I missed the mark somehow. Maybe I did something wrong. You know how we think, right? It's like, shoot, God said, but I guess I must have messed up, or I did something wrong in those 6 years. And yet, 4 years later, then he does become president. And Pat Boone, y'all, some of you remember Pat Boone, the singer. I asked Pat. Pat said he called Reagan on election night in 1980, and he said, he was there at that prophetic moment. He said, do you remember that time you had a prophecy you'd be president one day? And he said, Reagan said, yeah, I thought about it many times. And so just the way that our minds work, and we're trying to figure out what is God's purpose for my life. Did I miss the mark? No, it was just 4 years later that it was going to happen again. And so all those things are part of our process in the movie. Well, we are probably going to re-release the film later this year is what we're thinking about. I had to take so many great moments out of the film. I want to put them back in, 10 or 15 more minutes. So we may be back in the theaters this year on America's 250th birthday. So I would love it if you guys would keep a watch out in your social media, and we'll try to get back, and we'd love to come back out to theaters. I was thinking about the process of, we went through so many years. It took, as I said, it took 19 years. And there were so many times during that process for me where it was like, gee, is this what I'm supposed to do? Shouldn't be taking this long. We had COVID, we had an actors strike, we had even the war in Ukraine affected us because we had people from Ukraine and Russia who do special effects for us. So we had to stop all that. But in that process, it was really important to turn to God in prayer and ask God, is this really, really what we're supposed to be doing? And again, just thinking about our lives and the importance of prayer, and the importance of prayer when it's not quite making sense. It's one thing when God answers a prayer and it's very clear, and yet most of our prayers, if we're honest, a great deal of our prayers are not answered in the way we want them to be answered, right? And that's just life. That's just the way it is. And yet, every once in a while, I think God gives us those clear answers so we'll remember in the times they're not being answered as we want, oh, that's right, he answered that prayer clearly. Yeah, he is real and he is really there. And I've often tell my kids about when I was a kid, I was probably 12 years old, and we used to roller skate in those days. I was roller skating around town and far away from home, and I was so thirsty. It was the dead of summer. I was so thirsty, and I had no money on me, and I needed a drink. And I remember asking God, would you please give me a drink? And just then my skate clinked, and there was a quarter on the ground, and there was my drink, right? Just moments like that for all the moments of doubt you have, there's the super simple moments where it's undeniable what that moment was between a 12-year-old who needed a drink and God who cares about 12-year-olds who need a drink, right? And so I remember that often as I think about the importance of prayer. And another one would be, Jordan and I, we often have to remind each other, Jordan is 10, but we have to remind each other to pray for small things because we tend to keep prayer for the big things, but we don't think about praying for a parking space or something small in life, or I lost keys, right? I'm losing my keys. Okay, now I'll pray, but why didn't I pray the first moment when I couldn't find my keys? And so prayer is something that we really learned as kids from our mom because she would pray about anything and everything. Nothing was not important enough to pray for. And we're told in the Bible that obviously to pray without ceasing. And think about other religions, you have to go through a ceremony, right? In Japan, where I grew up, you often have a ritual bath, or you go out and you pray this certain prayer, or different religions where you pull out a prayer rug and you have to pray in a certain direction toward Mecca or whatever it might be. But that's not really what we're taught in the Bible. We're taught to pray without ceasing at all times, right? In every area. And so I think about that a lot as well. As I mentioned, Jordan and I are heading out to Chicago the day after tomorrow, and I'm giving a talk at Reagan's college, the college he went to, his alma mater, called Eureka College. And that's really where he would travel back from there. He would travel back to his hometown of Dixon and do Sunday school on Sundays, and then he would drive back. But, what are we going to be doing in the next 48 hours? We're going to be preparing. We're going to be packing our suitcase. We've got things we're ready for. We've got snacks on the way. And we're preparing for that trip. And as I wind down this talk, I want to ask Pastor Lance to come up because if there's any of you in the audience that have not prepared for that trip, right? A lot of you are Christians, but some of you have not prepared for that trip. And we want to prepare for that trip just like we prepare for going to Chicago. And you don't want to be unprepared for that trip. And so I'm going to ask Lance to come up in just a minute and lead a prayer for those who would want to pray that prayer. But in terms of us, thank you for all your support. It's so great to see so many hands up here, and we hope to put a lot of the footage back in that had to get cut out. It's so painful when you're making a movie to cut out all the good stuff from the childhood especially and those great moments. But we hope to be out again. And I'll be around at the back. Love to say hey to you. I'm easy to find on social media, wherever you guys are. The older guys are on Facebook, right? And the younger ones are on Instagram and Twitter and everything. So look me up. But I want to ask Pastor Lance to come and invite anybody who has not prepared for that trip to be ready, as we all are. So thank you all for coming.
Let's all stand. I was mindful in the back. I was sitting in there and I was thinking, man, to be, I'm catching my breath. I just ran from the back. And I'm old. But to be mindful of the sovereignty of God. Mark was obviously talking about being mindful of a very detailed God. Like he cares deeply about every area of our life. But there's God's part. There's God's initiation. In Ephesians 2 where it talks about even salvation. That we are saved by grace through faith. Faith. We put our faith in Jesus Christ. Our faith is only as good as where it is placed. And it's like, but then it says it's not of works. It's a gift of God, and we understand that, this amazing thing that God does, his part in saving us. We have free will, we choose to put our faith in him, but then in that same vein, almost with that same mindset of God doing this work in your life that begins really at salvation, he then uses this really interesting word that really talks about the purpose. Like, God saved you and brought all of us into this relationship with a purpose in mind. And that's when he's like, for we then are his, like, poemen. We are the workmanship of God, created for good works, that we would walk in that we would fulfill, we would find our God-given purpose, as Mark was talking about. And that's his purpose for us. And that is where peace is found, guys. That's where the settling of your soul is found. It begins at salvation, but then it's walking in that perfect will of God, understanding what he created you for. And that's really what is pictured here tonight. Just one man coming up here and going, man, I found my God-given purpose. And so let's bow our heads and close out tonight with that in mind. Lord, we thank you for loving us enough to send your Son to this world to take on our sin, Father, and to die on a cross to save us. And Lord, in a room like this, I don't know who all would need to come to you on your terms right now and just say, man, I need you. I need you as my Savior. In order to be that poem, that workman, or that beautiful poem that would fulfill your purpose in our life, we need to give you our life. And if that's you, even now, and you sensed, hey, that's me, I'd like to give, my life to Jesus, you can do that right now by just confessing to him you're a sinner. And that's what a confession is all about, agreeing and asking Jesus to come into your life, to be your Lord and Savior. You can do that right now and ask him to fill you with his Spirit. And when you do that, man, if you pray that right now, he will come into your life. He will adopt you into his family because he loves you. And man, this is where his will for your life will begin. You'll begin to understand that, and you can pursue that and understand it by reading his word. And so, Father, any of these guys here that have even now just allowed you to come in, man, they've put their faith in you and they've come to you on your terms and received your free gift of salvation by receiving your Son. We thank you for that. And we pray, Lord, that if those who have prayed and all of us would pursue passionately that call that you have upon our life, that we are that poem and that workmanship that only you can do, your purpose for our life, wherever that might be, in our career, in a marriage, in our family. Lord, that you would use us to your glory, that we would walk in that. You've called us with that purpose in mind. I pray we would find that, run to that, and bring you glory. Thank you for Mark, Lord. Bless him as he continues to be used out there in the music world and the film world. Bless his marriage, his family, and bless him for coming out here. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. God bless you guys. Thanks for coming out. See you.